Oh, I didn't ask you, did I?
It's okay.
Sonny, hold on.
No, I already said it. Well, I'll end it right there. I'll end it right there when I said I got nothing else to say.
Sonny, do you have anything else to say?
No, I don't have anything else to say. Stop asking me.
Okay.
Welcome to the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast with TJ and Sonny.
Hello and welcome and hello. This is the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast. I am super excited to be here. Super excited is one of my favorite phrases, so you're going to hear that a lot today. And I am joined, as always, by my best friend, Sonny Saltalamacchia. Sonny, what's real?
Oh, hey, T. How you doing, man? Good to talk to you. Good
almost
to hear,
like I just
good to hear your voice again.
Right there.
I just walked in the door and sat down, and my headphones were buzzing, and I picked it up, and it was time to talk. So here I am, man. Good to be here. Glad to be back for another podcast, and looking forward to hanging out with you for a while.
Yeah, I'm excited that we just have a space to just talk for an hour, then we get. And you know, because of our egocentrism, we don't just want to talk for an hour, but we want to be praised for talking for an hour. So we put this online for other people to see. But
this is where we're living right now with social media, isn't it? It's like it's not enough for the people you actually see face to face to look at you. We want thousands of other people to look and listen to people. Like it's really a weird society right now.
It really is kind of a strange thing, and then to you got to have the confidence to be able to make something like this, and then have the wherewithal to be like, man, am I being just narcissist right now by just doing this? However, none of that matters. None of that pertains to what we're talking about on the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast.
Well, sometimes it does.
Sometimes it does. Sonny, what do we got planned for today?
Well, we got a really cool interview with Frank Gil. He is the student ministries pastor at Epikos
Frank
Church
Gil
in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, home of the Robin Yount, most famous Milwaukee brewer ever. And he also does 15 Minutes with Frank, and a really cool interview with him. You'll hear that later on in the podcast. And just again, super grateful for Frank coming on the show. And then we also are going to kick it off with the Tales from the Fringe, everybody's favorite segment. And then that's it. So Tales from the Fringe, interview with Frank. We'll riff on that afterwards a bit. And then that's it for the week.
Well, that sounds like a great show. I'm excited about that. Some might even call it super excited. But I'm done with all this chit-chat. Let's get to the show.
To the show!
Join the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. And when you subscribe to this podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating. We desperately need your approval.
All right, TJ, Tales from the Fringe, everybody's favorite topic, basically me, you, and your wife. So this is where we break down what it's like working on the Fringe. And since I introed it, you have to go first.
Sonny.
Because you're not last, you're first.
You know what? I'm going to go first right now so that I don't have to be first
and I'm making you go first because I know you're searching for a story right now to tell. So that's why I jumped in, and that's why I kicked it to you. And none of this is getting edited out either.
I'm going to tell you guys this right now. I have a whole list, because I'm a youth pastor and I tell stories all the time. I have a whole list of ones that I can choose from. So I'm just trying to decide here, and I'm trying to gauge. Sonny, are you gonna go sad today, or are you gonna go happy today?
I'm gonna go inspirationally sad today.
Okay.
Inspirational melancholy is where I'm going with mine.
Hey, cut this out. Have I talked about the Fat Hamster on this? No,
you have not, and I'm not cutting it out. So go ahead and tell the story about the Fat Hamster.
All right. So as a youth worker, you get a lot of prayer requests, and And sometimes those prayer requests are silly, like, hey, pray for my YouTube channel to get some more subscribers.
Surge rush.
Other times they're pretty crazy. Like my grandpa's dying, and my family doesn't know really how to handle all that. And so you pray with kids for all sorts of reasons. And one day after a middle school ministry, one of our Fringe kids came up to me and said, "Hey, Pastor TJ, would you be willing to pray for me and my family?" And I was like, "Okay, what's going on here?" And he goes, "Well, George is going to die if he doesn't change his ways." That's literally what he says. George is going to die if he doesn't change his ways. And I'm thinking, like, George, this must be a family member. And I'm just like, kind of, I'm feeling it. And I go,
he's feeling the gospel. It's making sense to him.
Yeah, I'm feeling it, and I'm like, "Hey, what's who's George?" And he goes, "Well, George is my hamster." and I'm like, "Oh, okay, George is your hamster. That's cool." And here's the other thing. I'm gonna just pause right here, just get outside of the story. Is I didn't laugh in that moment because actually I get a lot of requests to pray for dying pets, and it is a really important thing in a student's life.
Pets are part of the family, yeah.
Yeah, pets are part of the family, and oftentimes pets are the first time a student experiences death. So so that's really what their pets oftentimes teach them about death and dying. So, you got to hold back in these moments. Like, you can't just be like, George is a hamster, so I was like, okay, I didn't laugh. I was like, "Hey man, I'm sorry that George is dying. What's going on? What's happening here?" And he goes, "Well, he's too fat."
Did you laugh then?
No. Hey, it's like, I am someone who can empathize with being too fat. But it was there, it was in the back of my heart right there at that moment. I was like, "Oh, okay, we got a Fat Hamster prayer request coming, dude." And he goes, "Yeah, man, we got him a wheel and everything, but he won't go on it."
I know the struggle.
He got the treadmill and it's just sitting there. And I go, "Oh, bud, I am so sorry about that. That's really unfortunate." But in the back of my eyes are kind of moving. I think you could, if you were someone who wasn't a middle school Fringe kid, you would probably be able to tell that there was some laughter I was holding back at this point. And I was like, "Oh man, I am so sorry to hear that." And I'm like, "Well, how did you guys realize he was too fat?" Because all hamsters kind of look fat, in my opinion. How did this hamster become too fat? And he goes, "Well, we kind of realized when he kept getting stuck in his tube." Oh, Sonny! At that point, I went, a little involuntary horse sound, and then I kind of stopped myself, like, "Compose yourself. This is a really traumatic moment for this kid, and his fat hamster's getting stuck in the tube." But I can't help myself, Sonny. I can't help myself because I'm sitting there thinking about this fat hamster getting stuck in the tube. And I'm
you're a big image guy. You're a big imagery guy.
Yeah, I'm a big image guy, and I can't get past it, so it just slips out, and I go, "How do you get it out of the tube when it gets stuck?" He goes, "Well, my dad has to blow on it." I mean, at this point, I'm done, man. I'm picturing this fat hamster getting blown out of the other side of this tube, and I'm like, I'm like, okay, let's close in prayer. At this point, I don't know what to do.
Did you pray for the father to have a big abdomen?
Man, I prayed all around George the fat hamster, and that he'd be able to get on his wheel and change his diet plans and not get stuck in his tube. But I gotta tell you, man, I've been to some of those water park rides, and there has been a moment in my life where I thought, well, what if I got stuck here? And I do have a story about getting stuck on a slide that I will tell in a future episode of Tales from the Fringe. But for now, that was the George the Fat Hamster prayer request.
You know, and it thank you for sharing it. And it highlights you could say it's an important topic, but in those moments when a student brings something to you, and to them it's a super important, urgent, really big thing, and then to you it's like it's almost laughable or it's not a big thing. Like, it's really important to honor the student and their perception of that, right? And there's some philosophy in life now about perception is truth. And while I think sometimes I don't agree with that, sometimes I do agree with that, because the way the student sees that is the biggest thing in their life in that moment, and it's our job to honor that and walk through that with them. The way I say it, and love them through it.
The way I say it, it's not perception is truth, but feelings are truth.
Sure. What they feel,
what you're feeling about this is true, and so I can't deny that, and so to acknowledge the feelings, to acknowledge that stuff, and here's the thing: is I've been there, man. I remember when my Cocker Spaniel died when I was a kid, and that floored me, man. It floored me, and so you have to remember, as you get older and you've seen pets come and go, it probably gets a little easier, and it's not as life-changingly important. But the first time that happens is usually with a pet, and it's an incredibly raw and actually ripe moment for ministry in a student's life.
Yeah, I remember my dog Samson died when I think I was like 5th grade. I came home, my mom told me, and then I had him since I was a baby, and I grew up with him. And I walked outside and sat on the back porch and kind of had one of those Pablo moments where I'm just kind of wandering around contemplating life, like, what am I going to do now? Samson's gone, he's my buddy. Yeah. But I think it's really important to encourage youth leaders to, no matter how trivial the situation may be, even when it comes to like, oh, this boy likes me, but I don't know what to do, like, those are really big situations for your students. And it's an opportunity for you to show them how much you love them. And so rather than just dismiss it as trivial and it doesn't matter, like, oh, that's just a teenage thing, like, don't ever say that, because that'll cause a division with your students. But it's a chance for you to show them how much you love them and how much Jesus loves them with the way you love them through that process. So good job, man.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge piece of this. Acknowledge the feelings, acknowledge their realities, acknowledge that this is an important piece of their world, and pray with them. I've prayed about all sorts of things, and I don't think God looks at us and goes, "Oh, that's below me," because the truth is, everything's
we're all below him. Yeah,
there's no like condensation, like when we think about God, he's not this snob in the sky being like, no, don't bring your fat hamster prayer request to me.
Another fat hamster request? Come on.
Oh my gosh, America's got a fat hamster.
Last week it was a fat cat. Now it's a fat hamster.
Yeah. He's not up there doing that. He just wants us to be honest. And I think, and this is a principle I always tell my youth workers and even my kids. I say, God, the only prayers I don't think God honors are dishonest prayers. Yeah. I mean, you got to be honest. And if you're hurting because your hamster died, or you're hurting because, somebody rejected you, or you're hurting because, you've got a personality disorder, all of those are real things, and we got to deal with them. And that's kind of where we're at there. But Sonny, I'm interested in hearing your tale from the Fringe. And because mine was so goofball and crazy, I'm guessing you're going to go sad.
Inspirational melancholy sadness.
Okay, thank you.
Now let's see if I can live up to it. All right, so we got this guy a couple years ago, came into our practice here, our counseling practice, and I'll call him Isaac. That's not his real name. I'm going to change his name. Okay. So his name is Isaac. He was a Hispanic kid, about 15. Excuse me. Came, wrong side of the tracks, classic story. His dad was around, but his dad grew up as a gangster too, and so his dad, in a lot of the ways he taught his kid, was the gangster code and stuff like that, Mom was real supportive. Mom was really nice, but this is a kid who had both parents at home, but due to the way they kind of raised him, he struggled. And so he starts to come into our groups, and he starts to kind of hang out with us, and he turns into be one of these really charismatic kind of kids. A lot of the Fringe kids oftentimes have these really big personalities and a lot of charisma, and I think sometimes that leads them down a wrong path. And he was one of the classic examples. He was already on probation, and but just a super likable sweetheart of a kid. So we started kind of being around more and stuff like that. We went to a football game once, and I didn't think he was even going to care about it. And when we started announcing that we're going to go and we had limited tickets, he was the first one to turn in his permission slip. And then the day of the event, I pull up about 2 hours before we're getting ready to leave, about 6:30 in the morning. He's there in the parking lot, wearing his Oregon State Beavers jersey, and he has a chair for the bleachers. And I'm just like, I love this kid, I freaking love this kid.
Yeah.
So he turned out to be one of these kids. So then he goes to camp with us, and pay attention. You'll hear Frank talk about the importance of camp later on in this podcast here. So he comes to camp, and I knew camp was going to be a time for him to really get it and really kind of come alive. And he did. He had a great time at camp. He was the kid who was up before anybody else. He went to bed later than anybody else. He was wanting to do every activity, and he just flourished at camp. And then this one night, we were doing art night where we had little canvases, those little 12 by 12 canvases, and we were challenging everybody to draw a tree. And the tree was to represent kind of, how you grow as a person and how your roots are planted. And there was a lot of therapeutic elements to it and stuff like that. And so, he does it. And then we got a picture of every kid holding their picture of their tree that they drew from camp. So then, camp ends and we come back and we're going through the pictures and videos, and I'm doing the video for camp and stuff like that. And I stumble upon his picture, the picture of him holding this tree.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most fascinating pictures I've seen doing the work because, and I'll post this on our Facebook page. I'll get clearance or I'll edit his face out or something like that so you guys can see it. But so he's there and he's holding this tree. And he's wearing a dark gray hoodie. He's wearing a beanie, and he just looks. If you were to judge him based on how he looked, you would just say this kid's a little gangster kid.
Yeah.
But he's holding this picture of a tree, and this isn't to knock him because I'm no artist myself, but it looks like something a third grader could draw, and it's such a
contrast.
Contrast, yeah, thanks. Such a contrast of who he is on the outside, but then what came out of him in this picture he drew was just this simple, simplistic, beautiful drawing of a tree. And man, I have it framed in my office, and it's just such a reminder to me of who these kids really are. When you work with kids that have an attachment disorder, which I've been doing a lot recently. These are the kids who got given up on when they were younger. And so to hide the pain or to protect themselves against the pain of being given up on again, they self-sabotage every relationship they get in when it starts going places in order to protect themselves from the pain. And the pain of the self-sabotage is not as severe as the pain of somebody hurting you again, And so all these kids who have these behavioral issues, typically they're there for a reason, but when you get past them, when you love past those external issues, gosh, they're just beautiful on the inside, And if we truly believe that everybody was made in God's image, do we believe that about these fringe kids that sometimes don't portray that, Yeah. And so every day I see this picture, and every day it reminds me of who I work with and the kids I work with, and to not be turned off by their external presentation, but to remember who they are internally and to speak and talk and love to that,
Yeah. I always call it like the burnt marshmallow. Because, a burnt marshmallow, it's hot, it's crunchy on the outside, it's dangerous on the outside, but the inside, it's just mush. And that's, it always comes from an imbalance somewhere. But I think that's exactly what you're dealing with is that, and that's one of the things that we talk about a lot on the show. But at Camp Respawn, you see that you get these kids out on a jet ski, you get them out in the back of on a tube, or you get them jumping off a cliff somewhere, and you realize they're just kids who need to play. Kids. Yeah, and I think that's so incredibly important because some of these guys, their look is threatening. They're putting it out there. Don't mess with me. That's their whole persona. And they'll tell you that several times, but they desperately need to be messed with, and not messed with like in a traumatic way, because they've had plenty of that. But you got to enter into their lives in a radical way, and you got to mess some things up in order just to get to that place. So I love that. I've seen that picture before. I think you sent it to me when it happened.
It's on the video too.
It's funny at first, and then it's really, really sad.
Right.
And profound. Like that's what I would call it. It's like you get all the feels from it when you see this. You're like, wow, that's fascinating. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sonny. That's a really important distinction to make, especially when you're working with kids on the fringe. So thank you for that.
No problem. All right, TJ, we were blessed this week to talk to the one and only Frank Gil of the famed 15 Minutes with Frank podcast, and we appreciate him joining us, and we're going to go to that interview right now. All right, randos, as promised, we are joined by one of my favorite new podcasts I've been listening to. His name is Frank Gil. He has a free ebook called Preaching to Students. 10 years experience as a youth pastor. He's currently the student ministries pastor at Epicos Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Graduate of Trinity College in Florida. 15 Minutes with Frank is his podcast. You can find it on the DYM Podcast Network, available wherever podcasts are found. He is also a Popeye's chicken enthusiast, and he has no relation to Frank Gil, the minor league baseball player out of Santiago, Panama. You can find him
In case you were wondering, you
can find him on all social media platforms at pastor_tank, and email us pastortank@gmail.com. Please welcome in the one and only Frank Gil.
Hey, fellas, I'm glad to be here. Yes.
Slow clap, single
clap
tier.
here. Well, hey, Frank, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's my day off. I'm enjoying it. The weather is above freezing in Milwaukee, so it's a great day.
That's that. Hey, it's a good day, and hey, we don't want to take up most of your day off here. So let's get to the hard hitting questions of this podcast, because that's what our randos expect here.
Frank, I listened to your most recent podcast, and you talked about not feeling it at a youth event. You said you were grateful not having to preach that day. So what's your advice to youth pastors out there, or just youth workers in general? How do you still show up and still be there in the moment, but yet when you're not feeling it? Like, what's your trick, or what's your tips?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I for whatever reason, I don't know if it was tired, it was like work, but I just wasn't feeling it. And the thing that I constantly remind myself in that time is often what I try to remind my leaders is that, like, you do this every week, and you're going to come back each week, and you can have a better week next week. But this could be the one and only time a student walks in.
Yeah.
And so, like, whether it's that first time student, or that student which is what we're going to talk about, like those fringe kids who are still trying to read the room and try to figure out if this is for them, like, this is their, like, 1 hour, hour and a half, 2 hours that they're going to have with you. So I got to figure out a place to find it in myself, to be like, I'm not here for myself. I understand I'm not feeling like I want to be here necessarily, but it's not about me. It's about these students that we're trying to minister to. So I try to, like, so there was a moment last week where I excused myself for like 15 minutes. People just thought I was in the bathroom for a long time, probably, and just prayed. I just talked to the Lord. I'm like, Lord, like, I legitimately don't want to be here, not for any other reason other than the fact, like, I'm tired. I'm just kind of like, like grouchy mood or whatever. And I was like, I got to change this. And so after that prayer, like, I was able to come back, take some deep breaths, drink some water, and I was able to kind of just be there for the students. Luckily, I didn't have to preach. I feel like if I preached in that mood, it would have been like, it may have came out of my message. You know what I'm saying? Like, kind of calling it in, but I didn't have to preach. So I was able to kind of just enjoy my time there, encourage my leaders, and love on some students. So just prayer and just understanding that this is maybe a kid's one time they're going to figure out whether they want to be here, and that connection with me is going to be important for them. So
I like that phrase of this might be this one kid's moment. I once had an old pastor state, you may be a person's first and only encounter with Jesus, And when they walk away, what is their thoughts about Jesus, and it puts a lot of pressure on you, but in a sense, if you give that pressure up to the Lord, it takes that pressure off. What do you do? Like, what's your pregame routine? Like, how do you get ready to go into youth ministry, to the youth nights or youth days?
Yeah, I think so. I am a big extrovert. I feed off of people. I love being around people. But I've found, especially over the last year or two, that I need like 15 minutes alone or so, just to kind of like look over my notes, to make sure that my sermon notes are good, to kind of pray, especially even like before my adult leader meeting. I try to excuse myself because there's already people there setting up. I excuse myself. People don't know what I'm doing. People just think, like I said, they might think I'm literally in the bathroom for 15 minutes. But I find like a quiet spot in our children's ministry that's far away that no one's going to walk into me. And I like look over my notes. I pray. I think about what I'm going to talk about with my leaders. I think about certain things I'm aware of that night. Like if a student said they're going to bring a friend that night, like I start processing that stuff. And I legitimately try to pray for as much as I can about that service. And then in the moment, like last Sunday, hype myself up. Like, I don't go in the mirror and be like, you are powerful. You are strong. And I don't do that.
No Superman poses?
No, not Superman poses. But literally just like prayer and just like being by myself for those 15 minutes. Because from the time, the way, because we have a shared space and all this other stuff, from the time our second service is done to the time the service or youth service start, it's like go, 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 go. We're setting up the room, we're organizing things, we're printing stuff. So like they have that 15 minutes of not doing any of that stuff and just being quiet, kind of reading and praying is something that I've needed for the past year to kind of get myself prepared for the service. Yeah.
So this is pretty awesome idea here, because not only does he have a wildly successful podcast called 15 Minutes with Frank, but every week before youth group starts, Frank takes 15 minutes with just Frank to get himself ready for his podcast. So this is a man who practices what he preaches. So this is the real deal here,
That's exactly it. I love it.
Hey, so Frank, I wanted to get into some questions here. This podcast, Sonny is a juvenile drug and alcohol counselor. I'm a youth minister. We come at this from two different worlds, but we found some camaraderie just in the way we love to do youth work. But really, where we have found a place in this podcasting world is with working with fringe kids. And every youth worker, every youth pastor knows about this idea of how do you, and I think any successful youth pastor has a good understanding how you reach fringe kids when they're coming in. What is your strategy, Frank, for reaching fringe kids?
Yeah. So my church is in Milwaukee. And a lot of people don't know much about Milwaukee. They're like, I know it's a city up in Wisconsin, but it's about an hour north of Chicago. And I would say Milwaukee is like a Chicago junior. It's an urban city. There's a strong inner city. It's actually the most segregated city in the country, where like where you're driving, what part of the city you're in. And what's been interesting about Epicos, my church, is that it is very multi-ethnic. And so our youth ministry probably reflects the multi-ethnicity better than anyone else. And because of that, I would say in my context, what I declare as a fringe kid is literally all the kids who are like from the inner city who don't get what church is. And that's a large group of my kids, is inner city kids who are kind of like their mom just found Jesus and they're like, the whole family's going to church now. And so when they come to my youth ministry, they're already like probably not wanting to be there, or they have some behavioral issues or whatever the situation may be. And so I'm constantly coaching my leaders to be intentional with every kid that comes in, but you can kind of get a good vibe of who those fringe kids are, because chances are their mom is walking in with them to introduce their kid to me. And I'm like, this kid doesn't want to be here. That's why mom is here. And so there's two things that I do consistently with those types of kids. The first thing I do is I try to make sure there's an intentional relationship with the leader. So as much as I can, I give a leader a heads up and I say, hey, this is so-and-so. He or she goes to this school. Hey, let's go talk to them. And my leaders are kind of trained with like a couple questions of like, hey, would you play a sport? What do you do for fun? To try to find those like latching relationship things. And so that's the first thing is connecting them with a leader, because students are weird. I wish my students are just like super welcoming and opening, but like a lot of youth groups deal with cliques, and especially like if I have a group of like 3 suburban girls and I have one girl from the inner city coming in, she's already going to feel like she doesn't belong. Yeah. And those suburban girls are not going to help that girl fit in any well. So having that leader be the bridge to show there is some commonalities here has been the biggest thing for those kids. And the second thing, and I don't know if this is like a cliche thing or this is something that we've heard often, at all costs, get that kid to camp. Camp is what changes everything. Because when you're away from your schools, when you're away from your friends, you're 5 days where we are in the middle of the woods with no cell phone signal, and you're literally doing archery and throwing hatchets, and you're sweaty and you haven't showered, and you're with everyone else. That builds relationships. All my Fringe kids, almost like I would say 90% of my students who come into camp as a Fringe kid who don't feel like they're connected, leave with best friends after that camp. And the longevity of their stay in our student ministry and the relationships, it happens because of camp. So like, I'm always thinking budget, scholarships, whatever I can do to get those kids to camp, that is going to be the linchpin to get that kid connected. So whenever I hear that parent tell me, they just don't feel connected, I'm going to say, are they coming to camp? And if you're like, well, we can't fit it in our schedule. I was like, well, then this is on you, mom. I wouldn't say that. But like, this is on you, mom and dad, because if you can get that kid to camp, it will change the relationship with the student ministry. I would say 90% of the time. There's always that 1 or 2 kids who are just like, I'm not sure. But intentional relationship with a leader, getting that kid to summer camp.
Wow, those are great. I love the idea of teaming them up with a leader and a trained leader, somebody who just sees themselves as a bridge into the youth ministry. I'm going to steal that, actually. I hadn't thought about that. I have students I go to in that situation, but you're right. Sometimes students, because they're not on mission at youth ministry nights and at youth service nights, sometimes they're like, yeah, hey, how's it going? What school do you go to? Okay, I'm going to go play Foursquare. See ya. And so there's those things going on. But man, camp. Oh, you hit it on the head right there. Camp is the thing. It is the thing that ties everybody back into that thing. And it's even, for non-Fringe kids that miss a year of camp, it's like, you have this incredible bonding experience and you come back and you're like, where were you? Like, we're all tight and you weren't there. Cause that's just how important camp is. I think those are two, for our randos out there, those are 2 huge pieces right there. A bridging adult to the community and then getting them to camp. What are you hearing there, Sonny?
Frank, what's been your struggle, or what struggles have you come up against with those leaders and teaching them how to be intentional, especially with Fringe kids?
Yeah, so the biggest question we are constantly talking about, because our church is more urban and inner city, is we're dealing with a lot of mental health issues. Yeah. We're dealing with a lot of kids that are questioning their sexuality, and then just straight up behavioral issues. Like we just had a winter retreat where our worship leader goes to our church. She leads worship for our church, and she took the weekend off to be a part of a winter retreat. She just went up to a student, and the student cussed her out. And so like, it's like one of those things, like there's certain behavior issues that we're constantly facing. So I think the biggest struggle is constantly it's like with our new leaders, training them on stuff that we've already trained our previous leaders about how to deal with a student who might have some kind of mental health issue. And so like, we have a couple of kids who need to step out of the room during worship because the music is too loud and it's causing sensory issues. When there's behavioral issues, to be okay with saying like, hey, tonight's not your night. Let's just go hang out in the lobby, and when small group happens, we can try to come back in. Like constantly training them, because even though our youth group is very ethnically diverse and very like socially, economically diverse, my leadership team isn't. And that's one thing I'm constantly trying to recruit more leaders that reflect our student ministry. But until then, I have to train my leaders to say, this kid who's from this background is going to react this way, and this is how we're going to love and serve them. Every week's a new issue. Every week there's a kid that might be confessing abuse. There might be a kid that is struggling with their mental health. And so they're like weekly in our group text, they're asking me, this kid said this kid did this, what should we do next week? And so it's something that's like, it's never going to go away. We're constantly like learning. We're constantly like processing. And there's times where I don't have answers, where I'll go to someone else and be like, hey, I have a kid who legitimately has ADHD, and I don't know what to do with them during worship because all they want to do is Fortnite dances. That sounds like a middle schooler, but what do I do with that kid? And then they'll give me some tips. I'm like, great, I'll apply it. So a lot of trial and error kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just constantly going back and asking, I want to love this kid. I want to serve this kid. I literally don't have any tools in my toolbox to know what to do with this kid. What should I do now? And then we go from there.
And I love that you bring up mental health. That's the realm that I'm in. Did volunteered in youth ministry for years. Me and TJ did youth ministry for years, and then I started working as an addictions counselor, and so that's primarily where I'm at. It's the exact opposite where you guys are. It's Jesus first, and then maybe mental health is the extra thing you work on, and I'm working on the mental health and addictions first, and then trying to give them Jesus at the same time. And I think it's important for the church to realize that, like, yes, Jesus is the answer to everything, but there's also a practical application of what do you do in the moment with this kid who has severe attachment disorder and his behaviors are acting up. Like, you can't just say, pray about it, ask Jesus, because that's not enough in the moment. You know what I'm saying? And that sometimes is taken or heard differently when depending on like who you say that to and their understanding of mental health issues and stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I have a kid whose mom just met with this mom a couple weeks ago, and he's being diagnosed as a narcissist. I don't know what the actual medical term is, but like he's diagnosed with narcissism. And like one thing, so we're processing with that with the student is how is he naturally thinks in a self-centered perspective and doesn't care. He has like a lack of empathy. And obviously empathy is a big deal in the Christian walk. And so walking through that, it's been interesting because there's these faith issues that we're trying to show them the love of Jesus and how to be like Jesus. But then they have mental health situations. That's literally a barrier for them to understand the spiritual side of it. And so navigating those two like streams have been interesting. And I've been making a lot more phone calls to my counseling and my therapist friends, as opposed to some of my youth ministry friends, because some of these things, it's like, we know how to preach the gospel. We're not therapists, right? And so like, we're trying to figure out how to navigate those waters with some professionals to help us understand what's the best way to serve and love the student who also simultaneously have these things that they're working through.
Man, I love to hear that, Frank. That's cool, man. You're doing that.
Yeah, and I think this is where Sonny talks about this a lot on the podcast is that, you know, qualification is something that's important, but oftentimes, man, it's one caring adult, you know, and you might, I mean, this kid might not have a counselor, you know, this kid might not have a diagnosis. No, you know that there's something going on, but they haven't been to the doctor, so they don't even know what's going on. And so really all you can do is get to that really basic place of, I'm going to care for you. I'm going to try to include you. I'm going to try to make it so that this is a place where you can have healing and you can have community and you can have identity. And we're going to try to just make room for you here. And I think anybody can do that, regardless of credentials, regardless of qualifications. Is that, I mean, some of my best leaders have zero college. They just have a natural ability to build community, to build culture, and to include people. And I think that if you work on that, whether you're in the counseling realm or youth ministry realm, you're going to be successful at what you're doing. So Sonny, we got one more segment, one more thing that we want to ask Frank, and I'm gonna let you do that.
Frank, on our show, we do every week, we do a thing called Tales from the Fringe, where me and TJ share stories. Sometimes they're happy, great ending. Sometimes they're not happy, not a great ending. And it's just, stories is everything. You know, it's relatable, it's learning experiences, and it's teachable. And so we want to hear a story from you, from your work with Fringe kids. And I know we're kind of putting you on the spot here, but if you got one you want to share, that'd be cool.
Yeah. So I got one, and it's like a mixed bag of like good and bad ending type of thing. So there was a student when I first got here, dad's in jail, mom is dating some guy. And like, she's just basically like kind of left to be like her own. She's like 15 years old. She goes to summer camp. She's kind of always a French kid. Just kind of shows up, stays to herself, whatever. Goes to summer camp and just flourishes. Like, she builds relationships, leaders latch onto her, and she comes to Christ. She comes to Christ on that summer camp, and her life is completely turned around. The new year coming in, and one thing I immediately is telling the same leader who I told ahead of time, like, hey, this is a kid from the inner city, crazy home story. You should kind of pour into her. Got her to camp, and now she's like, hey, how do you feel about me doing like a 1-on-2 Bible study? Me, her, and another student, kind of meet for Bible study on a separate night, not connected to the student ministry whatsoever. I said, that sounds amazing. Like, let's do it. So they do it for about a year and a half. They're doing this. It's going great. She is growing. She is learning more. She's becoming a leader. Around a year and a half in, we find out that she has a boyfriend who's significantly older than her. Like, she's a minor, he's not a minor type of situation. And that makes us nervous and uncomfortable. And so we're like encouraging her to, like, we don't think this is good. This is not a good idea. And she kind of pushes back on it to the point where, like, our relationships are becoming severed because she refuses to, like, hear to our concerns and warnings. We go on a mission trip. And the mission trip was not good, mainly because of her actions. Like, she kind of pivoted a wedge between us and the students, the leaders and the students. And she's like, gossiping and slandering the leaders to the students. It really I wouldn't say ruined the mission trip, because another student got saved on the mission trip, and it was a good trip, but it just kind of made the trip kind of a bad taste on our mouths. When she came back from the mission trip, she said she's not coming back to the youth group again. And she was gone for like 10 months. And the leader that was pouring into her just felt like terrible. She's like, am I a bad leader? Like, is the reason why she walked away from Jesus is because of me and all this stuff. And I had to do some pastoring to this leader now because of how this whole situation went down. And the good news is that the leader has kind of understood that students are fickle and students have these ebbs and flows in their walk with Jesus, where they have high highs and low lows. And I was actually able to reach out to the student about a month ago and have a conversation with her about, like, what's been happening. She doesn't necessarily, like, repented of anything she did or confessed anything. Or she kind of still doesn't take full ownership of it, but she admitted that her relationship with Jesus is not where it was, and she feels terrible about it, and she wants to try to come back. She came to youth group one night, and she hasn't come back since. With that being said, it's one of those moments where I feel like as a youth pastor, we're going to always have those students that we get really, really attached to and feel like this is our prodigy. And then they're going to walk away and we're going to feel really, really hurt by it, And I think one thing that could cause us is to become embittered towards student ministry and say, like, kids are bad, whatever, like they're going to leave us and, there's no hope. Or we're going to say, like, these are the ebbs and flows of people's walks. And if I were to look at my own walk with Jesus, I'm sure that might have been the case as well. But with her, it's like, I don't know where we stand right now. She could be coming back. I know she's still having those conversations. She'll message me occasionally, but it's not to where it was when it was like super high mountain peaks. It's still kind of like just above the valley type of thing. But it's been tough. But that's kind of how it is with some of our Fringe kids, where they'll have those high highs and they'll kind of revert back and have those low lows. That's where we are right now with that girl. Yeah.
Something that's helped me, Frank, over the years is this concept called the 47th counselor principle. And what it means is when the kid had that radical change of whether they stopped using drugs or they turned their behavior around, it wasn't necessarily anything that you did. It was that you were present when they were ready to make that change. And it kind of goes on the other hand as well, is that when the kid doesn't make those changes, they're simply not ready yet. And, sometimes you're planting the seed, sometimes you're watering the flower, sometimes you're pruning it, and sometimes you're there to watch it blossom. And I think it's so critical in those moments to help leaders understand that, like, it wasn't maybe, most of the time it wasn't anything the leader did. It's just that student wasn't ready in their walk yet. But how cool is it that even though there was a separation, there's still that connection there with her and with you, and that she still came back. You know what I'm saying? That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I told the leader this, is that student ministry is a long game. Like, we are not going to see the fruits and the benefits of our labor. Typically, we're not going to see it immediately. Most of the time, it's going to be after they graduate when we're going to see the fruits of our labor. And that's what makes student ministry simultaneously really hard, but very, very important. It's because we are the ones planting the seeds now and hoping that the growth and the fruit comes later, even if we might not ever see it. So
yeah, it's a long game, and the hard part about it is that with some kids there's this total like amazing, it just completely goes great, and then with other kids it falls off. And when you work with kids, especially on the Fringe, their home lives are messy. Their whole world is this just total chaos thing. And so when they bring chaos to you, they're not trying to be dramatic. They're just modeling what they've grown up in. They're bringing actually a piece of who they are to the group and what that is. And that's not always easy to take. But when you say, hey, I'm going to play the long game, I'm going to be the person who allows for your drama, who allows for your pain and your ups and downs, you're modeling to that student, I think, a miracle. Because that student hasn't seen that in their life. They just haven't. Their life is used to, I be dramatic, you be dramatic, and then, we hug it out later. But when you're dramatic and it hurts me and I'm steady, that's something different. And that is the type of thing that sometimes makes fringe kids go, okay, peace out. I'm out of here. This is weird. This is, I can't handle this level of different. But at the same time, other ones, it's like, this is what I want. This is what I want to be around, and man, isn't it true, Frank, that for every victory, there's like 10 heartbreaks in youth ministry, and it's just and that's what you got to model to your leaders, like, hey, we're not gonna get them all, and that's not jaded. My heart still breaks, but that's just the nature of a broken world, man. And so, hey, I just want to thank you for bringing that story and telling us about what it's like to work with some of these inner city kids over there in Milwaukee. And Frank, we loved having you on. Thanks for agreeing to be on the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything else you got there, Frank, or are we good?
I think we're good. Thanks for letting me be on the podcast, guys. Just remember that youth ministry is a long game, but it's totally worth it. You know what I'm saying? Like the investment in your time, the hard effort, the long nights, the tears, the constipation from all the pizza, all that stuff is worth it. You know what I'm saying? So keep it going.
First time constipation's been dropped on the podcast. Love it.
So I want to thank Frank Gil again for stopping by the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast. Sonny, just really quick fire. What did you hear from that podcast?
I heard that Frank's doing ministry in the right way. What I loved is that he has a diverse youth group, and the bigger than that, he's not afraid to tackle mental health outside of the church. And I think that's a really important thing to discuss, because I think for so long, either the church was scared or vice versa. Mental health was scared of the church and didn't want anything to do with those religious weirdos, and the church didn't want anything to do with stupid psychology. And yet, when you can blend those two together, I think that's when students win. And that's when your youth group wins, and that's when the church wins. So I was really happy to hear that within his ministry, they're reaching out to the counselors. They're reaching out to the mental health professionals to help them with these kids. And he's helping parents understand the importance of medication if it comes to that, but also just seeking out counseling. That was so encouraging, and that was rocking, man. Really appreciate Frank for doing that.
Yeah, I heard the relational ministry thing all throughout his podcast, that everything he does is in relationship with either to parent, to volunteer, to fringe kid. It's all in the context of what does the relationship require me to be. And that I have nothing but respect for that model. That is the model that me and you have made our bones on. And to have a guy come on here, and it's funny because you get these guys, and not every minister is the same. You know, some guys have a different philosophy on these things. But when somebody matches your philosophy of ministry, when someone matches your relational heart, it's like you might have just started talking to them for the first time, but it would have felt like the 1,000th time, because your heart is just literally aligned, completely aligned. And the whole time Frank was talking, I mean, I heard the camp thing, man, and me and you were both just like
cracking up, and he goes, and it's all about camp. And I go, Frank, that's the wrong word to say here, bro. Because it is. Camp.
Me and him we'll just become homers, you know, at that point.
And he loves Popeye's chicken. Like, he's like our best friend. Yeah.
That's right, man. We could easily align ourselves with Frank if he wasn't in Milwaukee. But I heard that throughout there. It's obvious why he's a player in this youth ministry game, and why a lot of people are listening to his voice every week. And so to have him on this podcast, I think that's an honor for us. But it just kind of goes to show you there's ministers all over this country who are killing it for Jesus because they are putting relationship first. And I heard that from Frank.
Yeah, that was cool, man. So once again, Frank Gil does the podcast, 15 Minutes with Frank. He's a student ministries pastor at Epikos Church, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You can find him on social media at pastor_tank, and then email us pastortank@gmail.com. And 15 Minutes with Frank is on the DYM network, and that's found anywhere podcasts are uploaded or downloaded or listened to.
We are still listening to the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast.
TJ, is this like the end?
This is it, man.
Already?
This is it. This is episode 15 is in the books. This might have been our smoothest episode to date.
Well, I know my voice sounded smooth because I'm using a different microphone this week.
Yeah, it really does tingle the ears. You spend that extra $500 and it just, man, it's like, wow.
Okay,
Sonny.
Don't be dropping how much I didn't spend $500 in this. Right? What are you talking about?
Oh, man. No, good episode, Sonny. Good all the way around. I'm glad we're at 15 episodes. That's crazy. I want to just speak to the randos out there. Thank you guys for making this community a community thing. Sonny and I are right now in talks about having an episode that is completely live. We've been talking about and teasing that for a while, but we're going to do it. This week we're gonna sit down and pencil out a date. So we need you though, randos. If we're gonna do this live show, we need you to pencil into your calendar and to interact with us, because if it's live and there's 3 people watching, that's gonna be a wah, wah, wah.
No, that'll be awesome. That'll be 3 people who started watching, and they'll be the 3 people who, like, when it's in the tens of listeners down the road, and the hundreds of listeners, they'll be the ones that say we are the OG3.
OG3 right there.
The OG3.
Right. The original OG3 is the Trinity, but you could be the OG3 part 2.
This would be the Goodwill OG3.
But, that's our heart in all this, Sonny, and we've talked about that several times, is we want this conversation not just to be between me and you. And I think going to a live show, or at least experimenting with a live show, will facilitate that a lot better, is that we can have other voices being heard.
Be fun.
Randos kind of chiming in there. So, randos, thank you for making this podcast happen. Again, this is the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast, episode 15 in the books.
I got nothing else to say.
Thank you for listening to the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast. Don't believe anything like that.